The sweet aroma of freshly baked bread wafted through the kitchen of Sarah's Sweets, a small bakery in the suburbs of St. Louis, Missouri, in the early morning. The owner, 42-year-old Sarah Johnson, had risen at 4 a.m. as usual and was now skillfully preparing bread on her own. "Mom, need any help?" her 17-year-old son Kevin asked, poking his head into the kitchen with sleepy eyes. "Thanks, honey, but I'm all right." "You go get ready for school," Sarah replied with a gentle smile. Kevin nodded and left the kitchen. Sarah watched him go, letting out a deep sigh. Their lives had changed dramatically since her husband John suddenly disappeared 3 years ago. Initially confused and at a loss, Sarah had persevered for her son's sake. Sarah and John had met in college 20 years ago and married. After Kevin was born, they took over this bakery from John's parents and ran it together. But one spring day 3 years ago, John said he was going out for a bit and never returned. Sarah filed a missing persons report and searched desperately, but John's whereabouts remained unknown, and eventually, he faded from people's memories. Suppressing her grief and anger, Sarah had been running the bakery alone and raising Kevin, who has autism spectrum disorder. Now, Sarah's bakery had become a local favorite, and Kevin had grown into an excellent student in high school. Sometimes, Sarah felt she had gotten used to life without John. However, Sarah had no way of knowing that this peaceful daily life was about to be greatly shaken. That afternoon, as Sarah finished preparing the store and was having breakfast with Kevin, the bakery door opened. "Welcome to..." Sarah's words were cut short. Standing before her was John, who had reappeared after 3 years. Next to him stood a young woman in her mid-20s, holding a baby. "I'm home, Sarah," John said as if nothing had happened. Sarah was at a loss for words, and Kevin stared at his father in surprise. The few customers in the store also looked confused by the sudden turn of events. "This is Ashley and our son," John introduced the young woman and the baby. Sarah took a deep breath, trying to regain her composure. "It's been 3 years, John. Where have you been?" "That doesn't matter," John waved his hand, changing the subject. "I've come home. I plan to live here with Ashley and our son." Sarah frowned. "Here?" "But..." "Yes, here," John said firmly. "This is my home and my bakery. You all need to leave." "Wait," Sarah said calmly. "John, it's been 3 years since you left. Our lives have changed." "That doesn't matter," John raised his voice. "I'm back. Pack your things now." During this exchange, Ashley stood holding the baby, looking down at Sarah with a smug expression. "Dad," Kevin spoke quietly. "We're not leaving." "What?" John glared at his son. "What do you know?" "Shut up." Sarah put her hand on Kevin's shoulder. "Kevin, it's okay." She then turned back to John. "John, we have no reason to leave." "What do you mean?" John looked confused. "Since you left, I've been running this place on my own," Sarah explained calmly. "Kevin has been helping me too." We've worked hard these past 3 years. So what? John didn't hide his irritation. It's still my property. Sarah and Kevin exchanged glances. In that moment, an unspoken understanding passed between them. John, Sarah said quietly but firmly. After you left on your own, things changed. We have the right to be here. Don't be ridiculous. John shouted. It's my house, my bakery. What rights do you have? The atmosphere in the store became tense. The customers quietly left, and Sarah bowed apologetically. Dad, Kevin said calmly. Do you really not know anything? John glared at his son. What are you talking about? Sarah took a deep breath. John, let's talk. But not here. It's not the right place with customers around. John looked around, noticing the other customers' stares. Fine. I'll come back tonight. Be ready to leave by then. With that, John left the store with Ashley and the baby. Sarah and Kevin watched them go. Mom, Kevin said in a small voice. Are you okay? Sarah smiled gently at her son. Yes, I'm fine. We're prepared for this. They nodded to each other, ready to face the storm that was coming together. That night, Sarah and Kevin waited in the quiet bakery after closing for John's visit. When the clock struck 9, the doorbell rang. John entered alone. His expression was even sterner than in the afternoon. Let's talk, Sarah said calmly. There's nothing to talk about, John raised his voice. This is my house. My bakery. You need to leave. Sarah took a deep breath and responded in a calm voice. John, a lot has changed since you left 3 years ago. That doesn't matter, John waved his hand. It's registered in my name. Is that really what you think? Sarah asked, puzzled. John showed a confused expression for a moment, but quickly returned to an angry face. Of course. I inherited it from my parents. Sarah sighed and exchanged glances with Kevin. Kevin nodded silently and stood next to his mother. John, Sarah said quietly but firmly. After you left, we went through a lot. The bakery was deep in debt and about to go under. So what? John didn't hide his irritation. I worked desperately to rebuild this store, Sarah continued. Kevin helped every day after school. We worked hard together to get it back on track. John started to speak, but Sarah cut him off. But that's not all. I also paid off all the debts you left behind. John's face turned pale. Debts? What are you talking about? Don't pretend you don't know, Sarah said coldly. The loans you took out on your own, the taxes you didn't pay. I took care of it all. John was at a loss for words. Kevin quietly spoke up. Dad, his voice was low but firm. You can't kick us out anymore. John stared at his son. Kevin, who was still a young boy when they parted 3 years ago, had grown into a tall young man. His eyes showed a strong will. "What are you saying?" John's voice trembled. Sarah smiled mysteriously. "John, after you left, I consulted a lawyer. And I took all the necessary steps." "Steps?" John looked confused. "Yes," Sarah nodded. "But we'll talk about that later. For now, there's something I want to ask you." John couldn't hide his agitation. "What?" "Where were you and what were you doing for these 3 years?" Sarah asked with a serious expression. "Why did you suddenly disappear?" John stammered. That's. And Sarah continued, "What about your relationship with Ashley? Is that child really yours?" John's face turned blue. "What do you know?" Sarah and Kevin exchanged glances again. At that moment, a strong bond could be felt between them. "We know more than you think," Sarah said quietly. John collapsed into a chair. "What do you mean?" Sarah took a deep breath and put her hand on Kevin's shoulder. "John, stop lying. If you tell us everything, we'll tell you everything too." John looked at them with a confused expression. Between Sarah and Kevin, there was a strong relationship of trust built over 3 years of hardship and effort. John keenly felt that he was no longer a part of this family. As silence filled the room, the next stage of the confrontation was about to begin. After a long silence, John finally opened his mouth. "What do you know?" Sarah was about to answer after taking a deep breath, but Kevin stepped forward. "Dad," Kevin said quietly but firmly. "Do you really not know anything? It's too funny." John stared at his son with a confused expression. "What are you talking about?" Kevin took out his smartphone from his pocket and started operating it. "Look at this." He turned the smartphone towards John. The screen displayed an official document. John squinted to look at the screen. "This is..." The color drained from John's face. "Yes," Sarah began to explain. "This is the deed to the house and bakery. I changed it to my name a year after you left." John received the smartphone with trembling hands and scrolled through the screen. Indeed, it stated that all the property was in Sarah Johnson's name. But how? John stumbled over his words. Sarah calmly continued her explanation. 6 months after you disappeared, the court legally declared you missing. After that, I consulted with a lawyer and took steps to transfer all the property to my name. John was dumbfounded. "But isn't that illegal?" "No," Sarah shook her head. "It was all done through legal procedures. Your parents even signed as witnesses. Dad and Mom did." John couldn't believe it. Kevin spoke up again. "Grandpa and Grandma knew that Mom was protecting the store alone and raising me. That's why they cooperated." John held his head. "How could this?" Sarah quietly continued. "That's not all. I paid off all the debts you left behind, and I managed to cover Kevin's therapy costs. We've been working desperately hard these past 3 years." John remained silent, staring at the floor. "Dad," Kevin spoke up again. There's more we need to talk about. John looked up at his son. Kevin's expression was dead serious. About Ashley, Kevin chose his words carefully. Is she really someone you can trust? John's eyes widened. What are you saying? Kevin started operating his smartphone again. I did some research. And he showed the smartphone to John. The screen displayed a photo of Ashley looking intimate with another man. John gasped. It's a photo from a month ago, Kevin said quietly. This is what she's like when she's not with the baby. John was at a loss for words. His face turned pale, and his hands were shaking. Sarah sighed. John, we're not trying to blame you. We just wanted you to know the truth. John collapsed into the chair. Why is this happening? Dad, Kevin said gently. We just wanted to protect our family and our home. Sarah put her hand on Kevin's shoulder. There was a strong bond felt between mother and son. John, Sarah said quietly. Won't you tell us everything now? Why did you leave 3 years ago? We want to know the truth. John looked up at Sarah and Kevin. There were tears glistening in his eyes. All right, John said in a weak voice. I'll tell you everything. About 3 years ago, about Ashley, everything. Sarah and Kevin nodded silently. It was going to be a long night. But they knew that after this night, a new morning would come. John took a deep breath and was about to start talking. However, Sarah quietly raised her hand to stop him. Before that, John, Sarah chose her words carefully. I want to know a bit more about Ashley. John looked confused. What do you mean? Sarah exchanged glances with Kevin. Kevin nodded and took out his smartphone again. Dad, actually, we've been investigating Ashley, Kevin said quietly. Why? Since when? John frowned. Sarah began to explain. After you left, we thought you might have started a new life somewhere. So while searching for your whereabouts, we also investigated people who might be connected to you. Kevin continued, I'm good with computers, so I looked into various things online. At first, we couldn't find any leads, but a few months ago, a person named Ashley started to surface. He showed the smartphone to John. There were several photos of Ashley looking intimate with multiple men. John gasped. All these photos are from within the past 3 months, Sarah said quietly. It seems Ashley was involved with men other than you. John's face turned pale. It's a lie. It can't be. Kevin carefully chose his next words. Dad, about the baby, is it really your child? John was at a loss for words. His eyes were unfocused. At that moment, the doorbell rang. Ashley entered, holding the baby. John, what are you doing? Hurry. Her words were cut short. She noticed the unusual atmosphere in the room. Sarah looked calmly at Ashley. Ashley, we know about your other relationships. The color drained from Ashley's face. What are you talking about? Kevin silently turned the smartphone screen towards Ashley. Ashley gasped. It's not what you think. This is. John suddenly stood up. Is it true? You were with other men besides me. Ashley burst into tears. I'm sorry, John, but you were always absent. I was lonely. John was shaking with anger. Then, this child. Ashley hugged the baby tightly. I don't know. Really? John collapsed into the chair. His eyes were filled with emptiness. Sarah sighed. John, that's enough. Tell us the truth. Why did you suddenly disappear 3 years ago? John looked up. His eyes showed resignation. You know, don't you? John said in a tired voice. Sarah slowly nodded. Yes, that you were involved in illegal transactions. You ran away because the police investigation had begun. Kevin looked at his mother in surprise. Mom, you knew about that too. Sarah smiled at her son. I'm sorry, Kevin. I couldn't tell you. But I needed to know everything to protect our family. John covered his face with both hands. It's all over. Ashley left the room, sobbing and holding the baby. Sarah looked at John. John, stop running away. It's time to face everything. A heavy silence fell over the room. The long night was about to break. On a peaceful Sunday morning 6 months later, Sarah and Kevin were relaxing in the living room above the bakery. Mom, I finished preparing the bread for today, Kevin reported. Sarah smiled gently at her son. Thank you, Kevin. I'm really grateful to have you. They gazed out the window at the town shrouded in morning mist. Hey, Mom, Kevin said quietly. Have you heard anything about Dad? Sarah sighed. Yes, I got a call from the lawyer. It seems John is serving time for a minor offense. Looks like he and Ashley have separated. What about the baby? Kevin asked. The DNA test results showed it wasn't John's child. Ashley is apparently living with the real father now. Kevin nodded. I see. Sarah changed the subject. Kevin, did you submit your college application? Kevin answered with a smile. Yes, I applied for a computer science major. Sarah looked at her son proudly. I'm sure a wonderful future is waiting for you. The bakery was thriving more than ever, loved by the local community. The bond between mother and son, who had overcome hardships together, had grown even stronger. The light of the new morning gently illuminated Sarah and Kevin's faces. A future full of hope lay ahead of them.